And so I try to talk a little bit because when they push the button upstairs, it takes a little while for it to kick in. I went to a sportsman show this last week here just at the Civic Center just down the street here, and noticed there was a nice turnout. The weather was nice and so on and so forth. And I think one of the most interesting comments I heard during the short time that I was there was a wife that was wanting to kind of cruise right through this sportsman club deal, and the campers and the boats, and the husband that kept stopping and talking to people. And she finally turns, after probably a whole hour of waiting for him to stop talking to people, and she says, "You know what? You're one of the best people that can talk to other people, but you talk to them about absolutely nothing." And I thought, I think my wife could have said that. But we're all different, Michelle claims that I could have a meaningful conversation with a fence post. But, that's God places us in God's family with different gifts and different abilities. And kind of like our wonderful technology people, Ken and Janet are up there this morning. And not all of us would feel comfortable doing that. And I'm so thankful we have folks like that like to do that. And Andrew and Tyrell and Claire and some others are up there helping. And if you want to give it a try, let me know. There's opportunity. And actually with Lent coming this week, by the way, on Wednesday. And it seems to me we get together at 6:30, kind of kept the time the same. And then next week we'll have a potluck and get ready for that. Anyhow, the passage that I looked at that would connect us with the Super Bowl theme and connect us with communion, I found this in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 to 13. Therefore, and I'm going to read it through, and then I'm going to come back and look at it verse to verse. Okay, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Verse 1 talks about the audience that we have, and it uses the word therefore. And it might take a little bit of time to get back. There we are. And it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, and we begin to wonder who that is. Who's the great cloud of witnesses that the author to the book of Hebrews has in mind here? And of course, if we know a little bit about the Greek language, anytime it uses the word therefore, it is wanting us to go back to the previous chapter or chapters. If we go back to chapter 11, it is that wonderful faith chapter in the book of Hebrews that talks about without faith it is impossible to please God. And then it goes into a very long list of characters. And Abel and Enoch are on that list, and Abraham and Moses and Noah and Jacob and Joseph and so on and so forth. And of course, some of my favorites, of course, is like Abraham is one of my favorites because of his life and because of his willingness to reach out, and God had called him. He sells a lot of his stuff, takes as much along as he could, and the Bible in that time claims that he was a very well-to-do person, so if he was going to travel with all of his stuff, it would have meant quite the undertaking. And then they come to this wonderful special place, and Abraham also takes his nephew Lot along. And then there was a disagreement between the workers that Abraham had and the workers that Lot had, and Abraham says to Lot, here, you pick and choose. You pick and choose the land, and of course Lot had chosen the fertile land around Sodom and Gomorrah. We know what happened there. And Abraham chose the hill country, but he eked out a living. Just like it would have been coming to some of the rocky areas of North Dakota to try to squeeze out a living. And so we are not only surrounded by these wonderful, faithful people in both the Old and New Testament, but there are those folks who've gone home to be with the Lord. Sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's a brother, sister, sometimes it's a child, and it's encouraging for us to know that in God's greater audience, who's watching us participate in the winning game of life, there are those cloud of witnesses. And so the invitation and the challenge for us is to throw off everything that hinders us, everything that would weigh us down. There's that wonderful painter one time that was looking, a world-known painter that was looking to paint the picture of an angel. So he goes out and he looks high and low, and he finds a child that had this great complexion. And you might have recently seen a newborn child recently on Facebook or someplace like that. And you can tell that the parents or grandparents even light up as they hold the child. And what a joy it is to look into the eyes of a child. And a lot of them look like an angel. And I'm thankful for that, because that changes when they get to be teenagers. Or it can. Not always. There are some teenagers that are very compliant and do exactly what their parents and grandparents, great-grandparents ask of them, and teachers in school, etc. But took his brush and painted this beautiful picture of a child that looked like an angel. And then later in life, he thought, he's painted a lot of paintings, and he wanted to find someone that personified someone who had a difficult life, even someone that might personify evil, which is really different. I don't think I'd ever have any interest in that. All you have to do is open a newspaper or turn on the television, you get a picture of that from time to time. But he looked high and low and finally found the person that he thought would fit the bill of someone that's had a really stressed life and somebody that looked like was really bogged down with the difficult circumstances in life. And so he sat there and got the person to agree, and he finished this painting. And in the midst of having a conversation, they discovered something very interesting. That the person that he was painting now, that personified the life of someone who was totally stressed out, was the very same person they had painted as a child that looked like an angel. What an interesting coincidence that was. But, sometimes people go right through life and they don't have a lot of stress, and they're able to make some pretty good choices, and they're able to keep their head above the waters and the storms of life. And there's other times when people can easily get bogged down and worry. They say that, for a person that's good at worrying, that it takes as much energy in 5 minutes of worrying as to run around the block 8 times. Now, wow, that's burning up a lot of energy, but they do it all internally with a heart that's working harder than it needs to, respiratory system that's working harder than it needs to, and some of you can stop bumping the person next to you in the pew now. No, I'm just teasing. But there are some people that have some things that they're really concerned about, and it's tough to go through life that way. However, at the very same time, we're going to notice that the encouragement for us is to let go. Is to let go of those things that would bog us down. And so we come to the Lord's table regularly, and we think about those things. And the term for sin, going on to the next verse here, has to do with missing the mark. Now, the sin that so easily entangles us, and the general term for sin in the Bible is the picture of the archer who's looking at the bullseye, pulls back, makes careful aim, and hopes to hit the bullseye. Well, even the best of archers sometimes miss the bullseye. And the bullseye is the goal of perfection that we have in Christ. And so as we go through life, we want to get better. As we mature in Christ, to identify those things that the Bible calls sinful, that the Bible helps us to understand that wouldn't be good for us, that would stress us out, that would so easily entangle us. And years ago when I was training for football, the football coach had these things that people would sometimes tie around their ankles. They were filled with sand, and they were pretty heavy. And the idea was to weigh down the feet, and as people would run with these weights on it, their muscles would automatically get stronger. And he had different sizes of them. And, I tried that for a while, but you know what? That wasn't a lot of fun. To put weights on our feet and start running. It took a lot of extra effort. It took a lot of extra energy. I decided to opt to go out running in the pasture where I had to dodge all these badger holes. I says, that was enough. That was enough exercise up and down the hills and through the high grass. And I says, that's good enough for me. I didn't need the extra weight, especially after we'd worked, 12 to 15 to 16, sometimes 18 hours a day. We were already tired by the time it was time to run 3 miles and lift all those extra weights. But then it says here, and let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us. Last week we talked a little bit about perseverance. This word perseverance comes up frequently in both the Old and New Testament, and it means to have fortitude. It means to keep looking forward, and it means to keep thinking in hopeful ways, in positive ways, in optimistic ways. In North Dakota, the minute it snows a little bit in the fall of the year, I keep thinking right away, it won't be long and this stuff will be melted. It won't be long and the sun will come out, but this winter we've had a kind of a break. We've had a pretty nice winter. Even some folks who have had the habit of traveling south to try to catch some warmer weather and have been here this year have said, you know what? It's not so bad up here. Not so bad up here. We've had some pretty nice temperatures. And so it's not been so difficult. And some of you on Facebook last week posted, I think it was the blizzard of 1966 when they had all that snow. And the snow, was piled up 20 and 30 feet in big banks. I remember in the back of our house, we invited somebody to come home from college, and the rabbits, we had an old combine we bought for parts, and so it would drift in. And on the south side of the combine, it developed this long slope. It was almost like a ski hill. And the rabbits used to run up over the top of this hill, and then they would put their paws out like this, and they would slide all the way down. It was like entertainment in the backyard. It was like an amusement park. And it was an amazing way to grow up years ago when we had all that snow. But we got through it. We found a way to get through it. And I was sharing with some of this last week that in that year when it was in March, I think, the blizzard hit, and the snow got so hard. We tied a rope from the house to the dairy barn. We had to continue to milk the cattle. And even though we couldn't get the truck into the yard to pick up the milk kind of thing forever, but we tied this rope, long rope, and we'd go out there for a couple hours, do all the chores, and by the time we'd come back, it had drifted shut, sometimes about 10 to 12 inches. We'd pull it out, it was almost harder pulling that rope out than it was milking the cows. And of course, there's no power, and some of my family members got to do that by hand. I volunteered to feed the tail calves, that kind of stuff. And there was 5 of us, so it worked out pretty good that way. But we persevered. And to get the animals out of the barn, we had this big hip roof barn. We had to build a ramp, and then try to coax these animals to go up into the hayloft where we had shoveled the top doors free, and they wouldn't go. They'd been stuck in that barn for a long time, and they were tired of drinking out of water buckets, and they were tired out of eating the stuff we were giving them. But they still wouldn't go outside because it was something new, and it was something different. Now, we collected everything, old pieces of wood, old bales and new bales, and this ramp had to be pretty high, and finally one animal went. And you know what happened? After they saw the first animal go, they were like a bunch of stupid sheep. They all wanted to go. I mean, you couldn't have slowed them down for anything. Once one animal, they saw what was happening, boy, it's like the computer finally turned on in their brain. And they tried to go up there 2 at a time and 3 at a time, and we tried to, keep it to 1 at a time, and then finally there was a whole herd of them, and the dust would just like fall down, and we thought, oh no, hope the floor holds, because the boards are only that thick, and now there's a whole bunch of big, hungry cows heading out over this floor that wasn't designed to carry that much weight. But they persevered. We persevered, and the snow melted. And, today we talk about it as a memory. The same thing happens in our spiritual life. Sometimes we're faced with some challenging times, and we begin to wonder, how in the world are we going to get through this? Well, we look back to people who've had this experience before. And we look back to those early pioneers that came to settle into this part of the country, and all they had was a covered wagon. Winter hit. They turned the covered wagon over on the prairie, and they figured out how to survive. They persevered through it. And if they were Christians, if they were believers, they came with 2 books. They came with a hymnal, and they came with a Bible. And that's how they sustained life on the prairie. It was, we're going to make it. And they had to live off of the bare necessities, and hopefully there was a few rabbits around, and a few deer around, and perhaps even a few elk and buffalo. Some of you in North Dakota would know better than I, because I grew up a couple hundred miles south of here. But they found a way. They found a way to make it work. And so as we look at our own lives, we want to remember to take time to encourage those other folks that might struggle in the area of wanting to persevere. But we grew up in such a family mindset that there was no such a thought ever about quitting. When my brother played football and it was time for me to, as a freshman, start varsity football, people used to talk about my brother, who was 5 years older, and they used to tell me stories. And they said, did you know that your brother, oftentimes in practice, the coach would send him back to the locker room early? Yeah, because he practiced so hard that he would pass out on the field. And they didn't want him doing that too often. And so there was times when he ran with the ball, and it was right at about 300 yards running. It was 11-man football, but he just ran so hard. But there was no quit. There was no give in our family. And when we did anything, we always did our best. And so you've heard people talk about people who grew up in this part of the country, and they're looking for workers, and that's still true today. When they're looking for people who really know how to persevere at work, oftentimes if they know that they come from the Midwest, and they grew up on a farm, or they grew up in a setting where that work ethic was strong, they would gladly hire those folks. Because why? Because 2 things. Number 1, they would know that they would show up for work. And number 2, they know that they have the ability and the desire, and they were trained to persevere. So let's go on to the next section here. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. And so it goes on, and I'm going to just talk about this verse a little bit here. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. And that's what brings us to think about the communion experience. And so we focus on Jesus, because that's what keeps us moving straight. Years ago, when farmers would try to plow those fields, and of course now in parts of North Dakota we have a lot of organic farming that has set in and come to us, especially over in the Tappan area. We have one of the largest areas of organic farming that exists in the whole state. There's like thousands upon thousands of acres. Lots of farmers have gone back to plowing. Lots of farmers that have gone back to trying to figure it out without using pesticides. Well, everybody has to make their choice when it comes to that. But I remember this one farmer who was new. He sent his son out to plow the furrow, and he showed him before, and he says, just pick out something. Just pick out something on the other end of the field. And the field was pretty long, a half mile. Some of you are smiling so you know what's coming. And so instead of picking out a post, he picked out a cow. Well, the cow was hungry, and cows move as they graze. And so, instead of going straight down the middle of the field to make this furrow, in the first run through the field, he just kind of went at an angle, just kind of followed that cow, followed that cow, followed that cow. Before you know it, he'd gone kitty corner across the field. And Dad come out later, and he had a few choice words to say. He says, I thought I told you to pick out something, at the other end of the field. He says, I did, but it was moving. Well, that's what happens in life, that people who don't always pick out Jesus, they pick out something that's moving, and it doesn't always turn out so good, doesn't always turn out so best. But Jesus keeps us moving in a straight direction. And you know, it doesn't matter what denomination we grew up in. The Jesus that we believe in as Christians, as believers, is the same Jesus. It's the same Son of God. It's the same person. And it is victory that we find in Jesus. Now, for those of us who have watched movies like The Passion of Christ or other movies on the death of Christ and the last week of Christ or the ministry of Christ, we'll notice how severely he was treated. You know, when they scourged him, it wasn't just like a little tap on the shoulder and, you know, here you are, this is for the sins of the world, now go to the cross. It wasn't like that at all. But the kind of suffering that he endured was immense. You know, when they had those whips, they would tie sharp pieces of metal in them and sharp bones. And so when they whipped him, they would pull those whips back and it would literally dig in. It would be like fish hooks digging into his skin and pull out not only his skin, but even some of the muscle and some of the pieces of flesh. It was just absolutely gruesome, cruel. But you know, he realized as he was going through this painful experience that there was a reason, that he was paying the ultimate sacrifice. So as we take the cup and we take the bread and we lift it up, we once again remember that the great sacrifice, the great effort Christ made to persevere, he made for us, for each of us as individuals, who for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. And going on to the rest of the verse, scorning its shame, you know, it was not just a physical pain that Christ experienced for us, but it was the emotional and psychological pain. It was, you know, there was a shame that went with death on the cross. And yet at the same time, there was victory. Because, you know, when the experience was all over with, and he spent, of course, 3 days in the tomb, just as it was prophesied in the Old Testament, and then he resurrected. You know, there was the ascension part where he joins after 40 days. He goes to the right hand of God. And then verse 3 says, consider him who endured such opposition from sinners. Whoa, let's think about that a little bit. So the cross wasn't the only opposition that he faced, but it was the opposition that he faced throughout his whole last 3 years of ministry. It was even some of them religious leaders. In fact, some of the strongest forms of opposition that came from the leaders of synagogues, came from leaders of religious groups, the Sadducees and the scribes and the Pharisees. Pharisees were some of the worst. And so he endured that. He endured that. And he endured other people who didn't believe he was the Messiah at all, that were there saying, crucify him, crucify him. But it says here, consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So the question is, when life gets tough, what do we think about? And how do we hang on to the joy of the Lord when we don't feel so joyful? Well, part of it is to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. For me, I continue to remind myself on a daily basis that our God is an all-powerful God who allows the world and people in the world to make its own choices. And sometimes people make great choices, and sometimes people don't make such good choices. Even today, we ask the question, who's going to win? Who's going to win? You know, and I know you're going to be tempted to say, yeah, the team with the most points, and that's true, okay? They don't even let the Super Bowl end in a tie. They have to keep playing until someone figures out how to score more points. But you know, it used to be years ago when they played this game that they would say, well, all you need is one or two really good running backs, and that'll open up the passing game, and that really makes a difference. Well, defenses have adjusted to that. And if you watch some people come out in the playoff games, now they start by throwing the ball a lot. Because by throwing the ball a lot, they spread out the field, and it gives the running backs, whoopsie, almost cleared out a running back here. And it allows the running game to work. And some people will talk about how important Super Bowl games are won by strong defenses. The other team can't score, even defenses can score by creating a fumble, by turning over the ball. But it doesn't matter if it's a strong defense, strong offense, strong passing game, strong running game, whatever it is. Whenever they hand the mic to someone, and that person, whether it's the winning quarterback or winning running back or winning receiver or winning defensive player, whoever it is, they almost always come back to the team. That it was a team effort. And when churches do well, and they hang in there a long time, like this church has, for 130 plus years in this building, for 101 years, going to be 102 heading into next year. When a group of people in a community hang in as long as you wonderful folks have, it's because it's been a team effort that we've all pulled together. And when tough times come, we keep pulling together. And luckily, the last couple of years have gone very well, and we continue to hope and pray that continues to go well. But even in our personal life, we want to remember, never, ever lose heart. Never give up. And that applies to people who are sometimes going through some struggles. And sometimes they've created their own struggle. We ask the question, what do we do? Well, we could say, well, they made their bed, now let them sleep in it. Well, that's real helpful. That'll help a lot of people. Even though it might be true, there's a point in time when people do have to assume responsibility for what they decide and the decisions that they make. But at the same token, we want to come around and be people of grace. We want to be people of peace. I have this little reading that I'm guessing you've probably heard. And it goes like this, entitled Eternal Life. And Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me show love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there's doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. Where there's sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I might not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it's in giving that we receive, it's in pardoning that we are pardoned, it's in dying that we are born to eternal life. What St. Francis of Assisi says it so well, and today we realize it's been around for a long time, but it continues to remain so true. Well, let's take a look at this wonderful reading that we do before we take communion. It's found on page 15 in our hymnal, or we'll be able to see it on the screen. I'll read the light portion, invite the congregation to please read the bold portion. The Lord be with you. Lift up your hearts. Let us give thanks to the Lord.